My sister snuck into my room, stole my debit card, and blew $9,000 on designer bags. When I confronted her, my mother viciously defended her. So I smiled, backed away, and let them realize exactly whose money vanished. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The digital clock on my nightstand glared a harsh, unapologetic red in the darkness of my bedroom. 2:14 a.m. My head was pounding with the relentless, rhythmic throb of a severe sinus infection, a parting gift from the grueling 70-hour work week I had just endured to finish a major architectural commission. I was 29 years old, running my own independent firm, and the stress was finally manifesting physically. My throat felt like sandpaper, my muscles ached with a dull, feverish burn, and all I wanted was the oblivion of a deep, uninterrupted sleep. I had specifically retreated to my apartment to quarantine myself, hoping the silence of my own sanctuary would offer some respite. But the silence was abruptly shattered by a sharp, piercing ping from my phone resting on the bedside table. I groaned, rolling over and pulling the heavy duvet over my ears, desperate to ignore it. A wrong number, I told myself, an automated spam message, but then came another ping, and another, and another. A rapid, frantic succession of notifications that sounded less like a casual message and more like an emergency alarm. Reluctantly, I slid my arm out from beneath the warm covers. The air in the room felt freezing against my damp skin. I grabbed the phone, the sudden burst of blue light from the screen searing my exhausted eyes. I blinked hard, trying to force my vision to focus on the lock screen. When the blurry text finally sharpened into legible words, the breath was instantly sucked out of my lungs. It was a string of automated fraud alerts from my bank. Alert: charge of $3,450. At Chanel Boutique approved. Alert: charge of $1,299. At Apple Store approved. Alert: charge of $2,100. At Louis Vuitton approved. Alert: charge of $2,151. At Nordstrom approved. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. The numbers swam before my eyes. $9,000. $9,000 gone in the span of 15 minutes. Panic, cold and sharp, instantly sobered me, cutting through the fog of my fever. I threw off the covers, ignoring the immediate shiver that violently shook my frame, and stumbled out of bed. My legs felt like lead, but adrenaline propelled me forward. I rushed to my home office, flipping on the overhead lights that blinded me momentarily. My purse was sitting exactly where I had left it on my drafting table. My hands trembled so violently I could barely work the zipper. I pulled out my leather wallet and flipped it open to the card slots. My personal credit cards were there. My business expense cards were there. But the specific metallic blue debit card, the one that had just been drained, was missing. The slot was completely empty. I didn't need to call the police to know who the thief was. I didn't need to file an unknown fraud report. There was only one other person in my apartment tonight. My 21-year-old sister, Mia. She had called me crying at midnight, claiming she had been locked out of her dorm room after a fight with her roommate and begged to crash on my couch. Despite my illness, despite my exhaustion, I had let her in. I had given her a blanket, a pillow, and a safe place to sleep. And in return, while I was incapacitated and vulnerable, sweating through a fever just down the hall, she had crept into my room, violated my sanctuary, and rifled through my belongings. I walked slowly out of my office and stood at the edge of the living room. The glow of the streetlights filtered through the blinds, illuminating the empty sofa. The blanket I had given her was tossed carelessly onto the floor. She wasn't there. She was out in the dead of night, swiping a stolen piece of plastic to fund a delusion of grandeur, completely indifferent to the destruction she was causing. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold wall, pulling my knees to my chest as a fresh wave of chills washed over me. The betrayal was worse than the fever itself. By 8 o'clock the next morning, my fever had broken, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion that settled deep into my bones. I hadn't slept a single wink since the notifications arrived. I had spent the remaining hours of the night sitting in the dark kitchen, a cold cup of tea untouched in front of me, listening for the sound of the front door unlocking. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the lock tumbled. The heavy oak door swung open, and Mia breezed inside, bringing a gust of crisp morning air with her. She didn't look like someone who had spent the night wandering the streets after a fight. She looked radiant, her makeup perfectly touched up, a giant iced coffee in one hand and a stack of glossy, high-end shopping bags swinging from her arms. "Oh, hey, Emma. You're awake," she chirped, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that instantly made my stomach turn. She kicked off her shoes and began hauling the bags over to the kitchen island, completely ignoring my haggard appearance. I decided to go out for an early morning walk to clear my head, and you'll never guess what I found. The boutiques downtown were doing an exclusive early bird showing for VIPs. I remained seated on the bar stool, my hands folded tightly in my lap to hide their shaking. "Mia," I said, my voice barely more than a raspy whisper, "where did you get the money for those things?" She didn't even pause in her movements. She reached into a pristine white bag and pulled out the sleek, shrink-wrapped box of a brand new iPhone, the most expensive model on the market. "I've been saving up," she lied smoothly, her eyes avoiding mine as she began picking at the plastic wrapping. "Influencer work is finally starting to pay off, you know. A brand deal came through." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of its normal strength. I stood up, leaning heavily against the granite counter. "I saw the alerts, Mia. I saw the charges. You went into my purse while I was sleeping and you stole my debit card." Mia froze. The plastic wrap crinkled in the sudden, suffocating silence of the kitchen. She finally looked up at me, and the fake, bubbly persona instantly vanished, replaced by a hardened, defensive glare. "I didn't steal anything," she snapped, tossing the phone box onto the counter. "I just borrowed it. I was going to pay you back once my sponsorship's clear. You make so much money anyway, Emma. You're an architect. You literally overcharge people for drawing lines on paper. You can afford to help your sister out for once." "Help you out?" I repeated, incredulous. "You spent $9,000 in the middle of the night on designer handbags and a phone. That's not help, Mia. That's grand larceny." Before Mia could respond, the front door burst open again. It was Margaret, our mother. She must have used her spare key. Margaret was a woman who always entered a room as if she were stepping onto a stage, expecting an audience and a round of applause. Today, however, she looked frantic, her usually perfectly coiffed hair slightly out of place. She rushed straight to Mia, her eyes scanning the shopping bags before settling on my angry face. "What is going on here?" Margaret demanded, stepping between Mia and me like a human shield. "I got a frantic text from Mia saying you were attacking her the moment she walked through the door." "Attacking her?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that scraped against my raw throat. "Mom, she stole my debit card. She drained $9,000 from my account while I was sick in bed." Margaret waved a dismissive, manicured hand in the air, a gesture she had used my entire life to invalidate my feelings. "Oh, Emma, please stop being so dramatic. You're always making a mountain out of a molehill. She's just a kid. She made a silly, impulsive mistake." "She is 21 years old, Mom." I yelled, my voice finally breaking. "That is not a kid. That is an adult who committed a crime. $9,000 is not a silly mistake, it's theft." Margaret's face contorted into a mask of ugly, aggressive indignation. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, glaring at me with a profound disappointment that used to crush me when I was younger. "It is just money, Emma," she hissed, her tone venomous. "Money that you have plenty of. You are so selfish, always hoarding your wealth while your sister struggles to build her brand. It's embarrassing how greedy you are. Family is supposed to support each other. You should be proud to help her get a head start." Mia, emboldened by Margaret's fierce defense, smirked at me from over our mother's shoulder. She picked up a quilted leather Chanel bag, tracing the logo with a perfectly manicured finger. Yeah, Emma, stop being such a tightwad. It's really not a good look for you. I looked back and forth between them. I looked at my mother, an office manager who lived chronically beyond her means, fiercely protecting a thief simply because that thief was her golden child. I looked at Mia, devoid of an ounce of guilt, already planning her next Instagram post with the stolen goods. They stood united, a wall of entitlement and delusion, fully expecting me to back down, absorb the massive loss, and apologize for making a fuss. And in the past, perhaps I would have. In the past, I would have cried, begged for the money back, and eventually given up just to keep the fragile peace. But I didn't cry. The burning anger in my chest suddenly gave way to an icy, absolute calm. I took a deep breath, letting the chaotic energy drain out of my tense muscles. As my mother wrapped her arms protectively around the very person who had just committed a felony, I stopped arguing. I didn't say another word about the money. I just looked at the two of them, nodding slowly. I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and loaded. Because amidst their arrogant smirks, their cruel insults, and their triumphant glares, they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the absolute absurdity of Margaret's entitlement, one had to understand the deeply unbalanced dynamic that had defined our entire lives. Margaret was a woman obsessed with the perception of affluence, a trait that vastly outweighed her actual financial reality. She worked as a mid-level office manager at a logistics firm, a perfectly respectable job that paid a modest, average salary. But Margaret carried herself as if she were the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She leased luxury sedans she couldn't afford, bought designer clothes on high-interest credit cards, and insisted on maintaining a standard of living that constantly kept her teetering on the edge of financial ruin. And from the moment Mia was born, Margaret had chosen her co-star. Mia was the beautiful, bubbly, outgoing child, the golden child. I was the quiet, studious one. While I was taking advanced placement math classes and working weekends at a greasy spoon diner to save for college applications, Margaret was spending her entire paycheck enrolling Mia in expensive, elite dance academies and pageants. I had spent my entire adolescence making sacrifices to keep our household afloat. When Margaret's credit cards were maxed out and the electricity was threatened with shut-off, it was my diner tips that kept the lights on. When the rent was short, it was my tutoring money that made up the difference. I had put myself through a grueling architectural program entirely on scholarships and part-time jobs, eventually grinding day and night to launch my own firm. Margaret never celebrated my successes. Whenever I landed a new client or finished a major project, her only reaction was a calculating look, followed by a pointed comment about how much money I must be making and how unfair it was that Mia was still finding her path. Recently, Margaret's obsession with appearances had reached a fever pitch. She had decided that her perfectly functional, 10-year-old kitchen was an embarrassment and absolutely needed a massive, magazine-worthy renovation. She wanted imported marble countertops, a commercial-grade stove, and custom cabinetry. But her credit was so severely damaged from years of mismanagement that no reputable bank would lend her a dime. So, she had come to me. She hadn't asked, she had demanded. She insisted that I co-sign a massive $10,000 personal loan for her renovation. When I flatly refused to tie my excellent credit to her disastrous financial habits, she had thrown a spectacular tantrum, accusing me of elder abuse, of abandoning my family, and of being an ungrateful daughter. The guilt-tripping was relentless. Eventually, she found a shady, high-interest online lender willing to give her the money based solely on her income, but the terms were predatory. She received the $10,000 payout, but she immediately panicked. Margaret claimed she was too bad with technology to manage the digital payments to the contractors. She complained that the banking apps confused her and that she was terrified she would accidentally send the money to the wrong person or get hacked. Her solution was to force me to manage it. "You're good with numbers, Emma," she had insisted, dumping a stack of contractor invoices on my desk. "Just set up an account, put my loan money in it, and pay these people for me. It's the least you can do since you refuse to help me get a better rate. My accountant and close friend, Oliver, had warned me in his strict, professional tone to stay entirely out of it. Emma, do not mix your finances with hers. Not even administratively, he had said over a coffee meeting just weeks prior. If she defaults, or if there's a dispute with the contractors, you do not want your name anywhere near that money. I had listened to Oliver. I didn't co-sign. I didn't put my name on her loan. But out of a lingering, pathetic sense of daughterly duty to just get her off my back, I had agreed to the administrative task. I went to a completely different bank, a local credit union I had never used for my personal or business finances, and opened a standard joint checking account. I deposited Margaret's entire $10,000 renovation loan into that single account. I requested 2 debit cards for it, one for me to buy the materials she needed, and one I planned to hand over to her once the project was done. It was a completely isolated account. It held no connection to my architectural firm's revenue. It had no link to my personal savings. It was an island, holding nothing but the highly leveraged, high-interest debt that Margaret had taken on to build her dream kitchen. And it was the metallic blue debit card, linked exclusively to that specific account, that I had accidentally left in my wallet yesterday after paying the deposit for her new marble countertops. That was the card Mia had stolen. As Margaret stood in my kitchen, her arm wrapped around her smirking, 21-year-old kid, confidently telling me that I was greedy and that I should happily absorb the loss of $9,000, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I looked at the glossy Chanel bag on the counter. I looked at the unwrapped iPhone. Margaret thought she was defending Mia from my wrath. She thought she was putting a selfish, wealthy daughter in her place. She had absolutely no idea that the money Mia had just blown on designer accessories was the exact money Margaret desperately needed to pay the aggressive contractors who were scheduled to demolish her kitchen on Monday. I took a step back, breaking the tension. "You're right, Mom," I said softly, injecting just enough defeat into my voice to make it believable. "Families should support each other. If you think it's fine, then I suppose there's nothing more to discuss." Margaret looked momentarily surprised by my sudden capitulation, but the surprise quickly morphed into a smug, victorious smile. "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason, Emma. Now, apologize to your sister for yelling at her." "I'm sorry, Mia," I said, looking my sister dead in the eyes. "I hope you enjoy your new things." I turned around and walked back to my bedroom, closing the door quietly behind me. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the hammer to fall. The moment I closed my bedroom door, the lingering fog of my illness completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp, and calculated adrenaline. I did not return to my bed. I did not seek the comfort of sleep. Instead, I walked directly to my home office, pulled the heavy ergonomic chair up to my drafting table, and powered on my desktop computer. The hum of the processor sounded excessively loud in the quiet apartment, a mechanical heartbeat matching my own. For years, I had allowed myself to be the passive victim of my mother's emotional manipulation. I had absorbed the insults, the guilt trips, and the constant comparisons to Mia. I had played the role of the dutiful, hardworking daughter who was expected to swallow her pride to keep the peace. But peace built on theft and delusion was no peace at all. The theft of that debit card was the absolute final line in the sand. I was no longer a victim. I was an architect. I built structures designed to withstand immense pressure, and it was time I applied that same rigorous, uncompromising structural integrity to my own life. I opened my web browser and navigated straight to the portal of the local credit union, the institution where I had isolated Margaret's high-interest renovation loan. I typed in my administrative credentials, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. The dashboard loaded, displaying the solitary joint checking account. I clicked on the transaction history. There they were, laid out in undeniable digital ink. The Chanel boutique. The Apple Store. Nordstrom, Louis Vuitton. A cascade of vanity purchases executed between 2:15 a.m. and 3:45 a.m. The original balance of $10,000 had been brutally slashed. The remaining available balance sat at a pathetic $950. I reached for my phone and dialed Oliver, my accountant and closest friend. It was early, a Sunday morning, but Oliver was a creature of habit who was always up before the sun. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and alert. "Emma, it's barely dawn. Are you feeling worse? Do you need me to bring you medication?" Oliver asked, genuine concern lacing his tone. "I'm fine, Oliver," I said, my voice steady, devoid of any emotion. "I need your professional guidance immediately. The situation with my mother's renovation loan has critically escalated." I spent the next 20 minutes detailing exactly what had transpired in the middle of the night. I recounted the stolen debit card, the automated alerts, and the sickening confrontation in my kitchen where Margaret had proudly defended Mia's felony. Oliver remained completely silent as I spoke, the only sound on his end the furious scratching of a pen on a notepad. When I finally finished, he let out a long, heavy sigh. "Emma, I warned you about this. I told you that mingling with her financial chaos was a disaster waiting to happen." "You were right, and I am rectifying it immediately," I replied calmly. "I need to know the exact legal steps to entirely sever myself from that credit union account without assuming any liability for the missing funds. I am only an authorized administrator and a joint account holder, not a cosigner on the actual loan." Oliver shifted into his professional mode. "Because the loan itself is strictly in her name, the debt belongs to her. You are legally allowed to remove yourself from the joint checking account at any time. You need to draft a formal letter of resignation from the account, sign it, date it, and submit it through the bank's secure portal right now. You must also initiate an internal transfer, removing your administrative privileges and handing sole control back to Margaret. Once you click that button, whatever is left in that account, and whatever debt is owed to that predatory lender, is 100% her problem." "Understood," I said. "I am drafting the document now." "There is something else, Emma," Oliver added, his tone growing darker, more hesitant. "Given this level of brazen financial misconduct, you need to protect your own flanks. I know you have her physical financial file in your cabinet, the documents she forced you to organize. I strongly suggest you look through them. People who act with this much entitlement regarding money usually have a long, hidden history of catastrophic financial decisions. You need to know exactly what kind of blast radius we are dealing with." I thanked Oliver and ended the call. I immediately followed his instructions, typing out a formal, legally binding request to sever my name from the credit union account. I attached my digital signature, uploaded it to the bank's secure portal, and clicked the button that transferred sole ownership to Margaret. It was done. The trap was locked, but Oliver's warning echoed in my mind. I stood up, walked over to my heavy metal filing cabinet, and unlocked the bottom drawer. I pulled out the thick manila folder labeled Margaret Renovation. I carried it back to my desk and turned on my bright, architectural drafting lamp. I began to sift through the papers, reading every single line of fine print, every addendum, and every piece of accompanying documentation Margaret had carelessly shoved into the folder. I found the original contract for the high-interest loan. The terms were absolutely sickening, a staggering interest rate with vicious penalties for delayed payments. But as I dug deeper, past the loan documents, I found a stack of old mail Margaret had accidentally included. I carefully unfolded a crumpled letter. It was a final collection notice from a major credit card company, but the name at the top of the letter wasn't Margaret's. It was Mia's. I froze, my eyes scanning the document. The date of birth listed on the account was from when Mia had just turned 18. The outstanding balance was over $14,000. I dug frantically through the rest of the pile, finding more notices, more red-stamped envelopes. It wasn't just one card. Margaret had secretly opened at least 3 different lines of credit using Mia's social security number the moment she came of age. She had maxed them all out to fund her illusion of wealth, completely destroying her golden child's financial future before it had even begun. The depth of Margaret's deception was staggering. She wasn't just an enabler, she was a predator. and she was using her own daughter as collateral. The urgency of the situation skyrocketed. I had to expose this, not just for my own vindication, but to stop a runaway train of financial ruin. The weekend passed in a tense, silent blur. I stayed in my apartment, ignoring the dozen or so text messages from Margaret demanding that I order takeout for her and Mia to celebrate the new phone. I didn't respond. I simply waited for Monday morning. Monday was Demolition Day. Margaret had scheduled a premium contracting crew to arrive at her house at 9:00 a.m. sharp to begin tearing out her old kitchen. I knew exactly how these contractors operated. I worked with them in my architectural practice all the time. They required a massive, upfront deposit check, usually 50 to 80% of the total project cost, before they would lift a single sledgehammer. At 8:30 a.m., I dressed in a sharp, professional blazer and slacks, gathered the manila folder containing the loan documents and the collection notices, and drove across town to Margaret's house. The morning air was thick with humidity, mirroring the heavy tension knotting in my stomach. When I pulled into the driveway, a large white utility van was already parked on the curb. 3 burly men in heavy work boots and tool belts were standing on the front lawn drinking coffee. I walked up the pathway and entered through the unlocked front door. The house was buzzing with chaotic energy. Margaret was parading around the living room in a floral silk robe, holding a mug of tea, enthusiastically pointing at the walls. Mia was lounging on the sofa, completely engrossed in setting up her stolen iPhone, the shiny Chanel bag resting proudly on the coffee table next to her. "Ah, the crew is here," Margaret practically sang as the lead contractor, a no-nonsense man named Dave, stepped into the entryway with a heavy clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Margaret," Dave said, his voice gruff but polite. He gave me a brief nod of recognition. "Morning, Emma. Didn't expect to see you here on a small residential job." "I'm just here to observe, Dave," I replied smoothly, leaning against the doorframe. "All right, well, we're ready to start the teardown," Dave announced, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "But as we discussed last week, Margaret, my crew doesn't swing a hammer until the first installment clears. I need the cashier's check for $8,000 to cover the initial materials and labor." Margaret waved her hand dismissively, an air of royal arrogance surrounding her. Yes, of course. Emma handles all my administrative finances. She's the sensible one with the checkbook." She turned to me, snapping her fingers impatiently. "Come on, Emma. Write the man his check so they can get to work. I want this old granite out of here by noon." The room fell completely silent. Dave looked at me expectantly. Mia barely glanced up from her glowing screen. I did not reach for my purse. I did not move. I simply looked at my mother, my expression entirely blank. "I cannot write that check, Mom." Margaret rolled her eyes, letting out an exaggerated sigh. "Emma, please do not start with your dramatic penny-pinching routine today. We have professionals waiting. Write the check from the renovation account." "I cannot write the check," I repeated, my voice rising just enough to command the room, "because the renovation account no longer has $8,000 in it." Margaret froze. The teacup in her hand rattled slightly against its saucer. Dave frowned, stepping back slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden shift in the atmosphere. "What are you talking about?" Margaret demanded, a sharp edge of panic piercing through her arrogance. "I took out a $10,000 loan. The money was deposited on Friday." I saw the statement. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, walking past Margaret and stopping directly in front of the sofa. I looked down at Mia, who had finally paused her tapping, looking up at me with furrowed brows. "Mia," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. "When you broke into my room on Saturday night, you took a blue debit card. You assumed it was linked to my personal savings. You assumed you were stealing my money." Mia's face flushed a deep, angry red. "I didn't steal it. Mom said." "I know what Mom said," I interrupted, my tone slicing through the air like a blade. "But Mom didn't know the truth. Because I refused to co-sign her loan, I opened a completely separate, isolated account just to hold her kitchen money. That blue debit card you stole, That card was the sole access point to Mom's $10,000 renovation loan. I turned my head slowly to look at Margaret. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. "So, Mom," I continued, gesturing toward the gleaming Chanel bag and the new phone. "When you screamed at me that it was just money, and that I should be proud to support my sister's impulsive shopping spree. You weren't defending her from stealing my money. You were cheering her on as she blew $9,000 of your kitchen budget on designer purses." The silence in the room was absolute, suffocating, and heavy. Mia's mouth fell open, her eyes darting frantically from the phone in her hand to Margaret's pale face. "No," Margaret whispered, her voice trembling violently. "No, you're lying. You're just being spiteful. You have plenty of money, Emma. You're trying to ruin my dream kitchen because you're jealous." She turned to Dave, her panic escalating into wild, irrational anger. "She's lying to you. She's withholding my funds. I'll sue her. I'll call the police right now and have her arrested for embezzlement." Her poorly executed threats hung pathetically in the air. Dave, a seasoned contractor who had seen every flavor of family dysfunction, simply shook his head. He recognized a sinking ship when he saw one. "I don't care who pays, Margaret," Dave said firmly, "but if I don't have an $8,000 check in my hand in the next 60 seconds, my crew is leaving." The 60 seconds passed in excruciating, agonizing tension. I didn't move a muscle. Margaret frantically scrambled to her purse, tearing through her wallet, pulling out a handful of maxed-out credit cards as if one of them would magically produce $8,000. "Dave, please, just give me a day," Margaret begged, her previous arrogance completely shattered, replaced by a desperate, humiliating pleading. "I can get the money. Just start the demolition. I promise you'll be paid." "Sorry, Margaret. Company policy," Dave said firmly. He turned on his heel, signaled his crew out on the lawn, and walked out the front door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, sealing the three of us inside the quiet house. The moment the van pulled away from the curb, Margaret turned on Mia with the ferocity of a cornered animal. The protective, coddling mother from yesterday vanished instantly. "Give them back," Margaret shrieked, lunging toward the sofa. "Give me the bags. Put the phone back in the box. We have to return them right now. We have to get the cash back before the lender finds out." Mia recoiled, clutching the new iPhone to her chest defensively. The illusion of her perfect, providing mother was cracking, but Mia, heavily manipulated and entirely dependent on that illusion, desperately tried to hold the pieces together. "No, you can't make me return them." Mia yelled back, tears springing to her eyes. "You said I could keep them. You said Emma had plenty of money and she was just being selfish. You said everything was fine. It was supposed to be her money." Margaret screamed, her face contorted in a mask of pure panic. "I didn't know you took the blue card. You stupid, foolish girl, you ruined everything. Hand them over now." Mia was sobbing now, a genuine, terrified cry. She was struggling immensely with her loyalty. Her entire worldview was predicated on Margaret being the wealthy benefactor and me being the villainous, greedy sister. Even as Margaret clawed at her, demanding the stolen goods, Mia stubbornly defended the twisted reality she had been fed. "Emma, fix this." Mia pleaded, looking at me through her tears. "Just write the check for her. You can afford it. Stop doing this to us." Margaret, grasping at any straw, suddenly spun toward me, a terrifyingly manic look in her eyes. "Yes, Emma, you have to fix this. If you don't pay the contractors, I'll default on the loan. You're the account manager, you're responsible. I will tell the lender you authorized the purchases." Her desperation had reached the point of utter delusion. She was trying to legally bind me to a crime I didn't commit, hoping to drag me down into the financial grave she had dug for herself. "I am no longer the account manager," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the living room. "I officially removed my name and all administrative access to that account an hour ago. You are the sole owner of the account, and you are the sole name on that predatory loan. The bank has all the transaction timestamps. They know exactly where the money went." Margaret gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She stumbled backward, collapsing into a nearby armchair. "But I didn't just come here to tell you about the kitchen, Mom," I continued, unyielding. I unclasped the manila folder I had been holding and stepped toward the coffee table. I looked directly at my sister, whose tear-streaked face was a portrait of deep confusion. "Mia," I said softly, yet firmly, "you think Mom has been supporting you all these years. You think she's been providing for your lifestyle because she's successful and I'm just greedy." I pulled out the stack of red-stamped collection notices and dropped them onto the glass coffee table. They landed with a heavy, final thud. "Read them," I commanded. Mia hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached out. She picked up the top letter. I watched her eyes scan the text. I watched the exact moment her brain processed the information. I watched her lips silently mouth her own name, printed boldly at the top of a debt collection notice for a card she had never opened. What is this?" Mia stammered, picking up the second letter, then the third. $14,000. Capital 1, discover, I don't have these cards. "You don't," I confirmed. "But Mom does. The day you turned 18, she used your social security number to open 3 separate lines of credit. She maxed them out to lease her car, to buy her clothes, and to pretend she had a life she couldn't afford. She hasn't been paying the minimums for over a year." Mia slowly raised her head. The defensive, spoiled brat from the day before was entirely gone. In her place was a deeply betrayed, thoroughly broken young woman. She looked at Margaret, who was now weeping loudly into her hands, refusing to make eye contact. "You ruined my credit," Mia whispered, her voice cracking with a devastation that cut to the bone. "You ruined my future, so you could look rich." The spell was finally, irrevocably broken. The manipulated loved one saw the puppet master for exactly who she was. Margaret's history of deception was laid bare on the coffee table, a permanent monument to her profound, destructive selfishness. There was nowhere left for her to hide. The aftermath of that morning's revelation in the living room did not result in Margaret's surrender. Instead, her profound delusion and absolute obsession with her public image triggered a terrifying level of compartmentalization. Less than 4 hours after the contractors had walked out, completely abandoning the renovation, my phone buzzed on my desk. It was a text message from Margaret. "We are still on for the celebratory family dinner at the Wellington tonight at 7:00 p.m. Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Henry, and your cousin Claire are already on their way into town. Dress nicely. Do not embarrass me tonight. We will discuss your financial responsibilities regarding my kitchen tomorrow." I stared at the screen, momentarily stunned by the sheer, unadulterated audacity. She was actually going to pretend that the morning hadn't happened. She had invited our extended family to a high-end, ridiculously expensive steakhouse weeks ago to gloat about her impending, luxury kitchen renovation. And she was entirely too narcissistic to cancel it and admit defeat. She fully expected me to show up, play the part of the dutiful, quiet daughter, and foot the exorbitant restaurant bill to keep up her facade. It was the perfect stage. She had built it herself, and now she was insisting I step onto it. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously preparing. I did not just bring the original documents. I used my home office scanner to make crisp, high-quality copies of the predatory loan agreement, the bank statements showing the 200 AM designer purchases, and most importantly, the 3 separate credit card collection notices bearing Mia's name. I placed a set of these documents into 3 separate, pristine white envelopes. At 6:50 p.m., I arrived at the Wellington. It was an opulent establishment, characterized by dark mahogany paneling, dim, warm lighting, and the quiet hum of wealthy patrons. The maitre d' led me to a large, circular booth in the center of the main dining room. The family was already seated. Aunt Beatrice, Margaret's older sister, was sipping a martini, while Uncle Henry and Cousin Claire were browsing the leather-bound menus. And there, sitting at the head of the table, was Margaret. She had spent the afternoon at a salon, her hair perfectly blown out, wearing a silk dress she couldn't afford. She was smiling radiantly, chatting with Beatrice as if her entire financial world hadn't just imploded. Next to her sat Mia, who looked like a ghost. Mia's eyes were red and swollen, her posture hunched, the stolen Chanel bag resting awkwardly on her lap like a physical weight pulling her down. "Ah, Emma, you finally made it," Margaret declared loudly as I approached, her voice carrying over the gentle clinking of silverware. She offered me a smile so fake it belonged in a museum. "We were just talking about the house. It's such a stressful process, managing contractors, isn't it?" I slid into the booth across from her. I looked at Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Henry, who were nodding sympathetically. "It must be wonderful to finally get that dream kitchen, Margaret," Aunt Beatrice said, patting my mother's hand. "You've worked so hard for it, and it's so lovely of Emma to help manage the project for you." "Well," Margaret sighed, a practiced, long-suffering sigh meant to garner maximum sympathy. "It would be easier if Emma wasn't being so incredibly stubborn. She's been very uncooperative today. I practically had to beg her to release the funds to the builders this morning. She is always trying to control my money." That was it, the absolute peak of her manipulation. She was preemptively painting me as the villain to our extended family, just in case the truth ever leaked out. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I simply reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the 3 white envelopes. I calmly slid one across the polished mahogany table to Aunt Beatrice, one to Uncle Henry, and one to Cousin Claire. "I'm not trying to control her money, Aunt Beatrice," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying a quiet authority that instantly silenced the table. "I am simply refusing to be held responsible for her fraud." Margaret's fake smile instantly shattered. Her eyes widened in sheer panic, darting to the envelopes. "Emma, what are you doing? Put those away right now. This is a family dinner." "Please open them," I instructed my aunt and uncle, completely ignoring Margaret's rising hysteria. Aunt Beatrice, looking utterly confused, broke the seal on her envelope and pulled out the papers. Uncle Henry put on his reading glasses and did the same. "As you can see on the first page," I explained calmly, maintaining eye contact with my shocked relatives, Mom did not save up for a kitchen. She took out a $10,000 high-interest predatory loan because her own credit is ruined. I refused to co-sign, but I agreed to hold the money in a separate, isolated account. I paused, letting them digest the horrifying interest rates printed on the page. "Last night," I continued, gesturing toward my sister, "Mia stole the debit card linked to that specific account. She spent $9,000 of Mom's kitchen loan on a new iPhone and designer handbags." Aunt Beatrice gasped aloud, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Mia in horror. Mia shrank back into the booth, tears silently spilling over her eyelashes. "Emma, stop it," Margaret shrieked, no longer caring about the other patrons turning to stare at our table. "You are ruining this dinner. You are a spiteful, jealous liar." "Turn to the 3rd page," I commanded my relatives, my voice cutting through Margaret's screaming like ice. They flipped the pages. I watched Uncle Henry's face transform from confusion to absolute, unadulterated disgust. "Mom defended me as theft," I explained to the table, ensuring every word was crystal clear. "She told me I was greedy and that I should pay for it. She thought Mia had stolen my money. She only panicked when she realized it was her own. But that is not the worst part. Look at the names on those collection notices." Aunt Beatrice read the document, her voice trembling. "Mia, these are in Mia's name. $14,000 from 3 years ago. Mom has been stealing Mia's identity since she turned 18, I stated, delivering the final, crushing blow. She opened secret credit cards in her own daughter's name, maxed them out to fund her luxury lifestyle, and defaulted on all of them. She didn't just enable Mia, she entirely destroyed her future to buy silk dresses and salon appointments. The silence at the table was deafening. Margaret was hyperventilating, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the table as if the floor had vanished beneath her. She looked around desperately, hoping for a lifeline, but she found only the horrified, condemning stares of her own sister and brother-in-law. "Margaret," Aunt Beatrice whispered, her voice laced with profound revulsion. "How could you, to your own child?" Then, the final, decisive action occurred. Mia, who had spent her entire life cowering under Margaret's influence, suddenly stood up. The movement was sharp and jarring. She reached into the stolen Chanel bag, pulled out the brand new, unwrapped iPhone, and slammed it onto the table directly in front of Margaret. She then unceremoniously dropped the designer bag right on top of Margaret's dinner plate. "I am not a kid anymore," Mia said, her voice shaking but laced with a newfound, undeniable strength. "And I am not your puppet. I am returning everything tomorrow. And then, I am going to the police to report you for stealing my identity." Mia didn't wait for a response. She turned her back on our mother, looked at me with a profound expression of sorrow and gratitude, and walked out of the restaurant, her head held high. The fallout from the dinner at the Wellington was swift, absolute, and utterly devastating for Margaret. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Henry did not stay to comfort her. They threw a $50 bill on the table to cover their untouched drinks, expressed their profound apologies to me, and walked out, leaving Margaret sitting entirely alone with her ruined facade and a massive, unpaid tab. I left shortly after they did, feeling lighter than I had in nearly a decade. Later that evening, there was a quiet, hesitant knock on the door of my apartment. I opened it to find Mia standing in the hallway, holding a small duffel bag. The designer accessories were gone, replaced by the humble reality of her situation. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice raspy from crying. I stepped aside, welcoming her into my sanctuary. We sat at my kitchen island, the exact spot where the chaotic confrontation had taken place just 24 hours prior. But the energy was completely different now. The toxic, competitive dynamic that Margaret had carefully cultivated between us was gone, burned away by the harsh light of the truth. "Emma, I am so deeply, incredibly sorry," Mia began, staring down at her folded hands. "I was horrible to you. I stole from you. I believed every lie she told me because it was easier than facing the truth. I was so arrogant and I was so wrong. I will do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll work 3 jobs. I'll pay you back for the trust I broke." I reached across the cool granite counter and placed my hand over hers. For the first time in our lives, I looked at my sister and didn't see a rival or a spoiled brat. I saw a fellow survivor of our mother's psychological warfare. "You don't owe me money, Mia," I said softly, emphasizing the reality of the situation. "You owe the bank and you are going to handle that, but you do owe yourself a better life. We both do." The healing process was not instantaneous, but it was steady. The very next morning, I utilized my professional network to help her. I called Oliver, who put us in touch with a highly respected fraud attorney. We sat in a sleek, glass-walled office downtown as the attorney guided Mia through the painful but necessary steps of formally reporting the identity theft. We filed the police reports, contacted the major credit bureaus to place a hard freeze on her social security number, and submitted the dispute paperwork for the $14,000 in fraudulent charges. Because Mia took full responsibility for the debit card theft, she immediately returned the designer bags and the phone to the respective boutiques. The stores, citing their strict return policies on opened electronics and used tags, refunded about 80% of the purchase price. Mia deposited every single penny of that refund back into the joint credit union account. It wasn't the full $9,000, but it was enough to show the bank she was acting in good faith. Margaret, however, faced the definitive, catastrophic consequences of her lifelong deception. Because the contractors had abandoned the job, she was left with a half-demolished, unusable kitchen. Because the account was short, she immediately defaulted on the first massive payment of the predatory $10,000 loan. The shady lender did not offer grace periods or sympathy. They immediately sent her account to aggressive collections, garnishing her wages at the logistics firm. Furthermore, the police investigation into Mia's identity theft advanced rapidly. Faced with irrefutable paper trails and the testimonies of her own daughters, Margaret's flimsy defenses crumbled. The social exile she experienced was even more punishing than the legal trouble. Aunt Beatrice spread the truth to every branch of our extended family. Margaret was uninvited from holidays, blocked on social media, and completely ostracized by the very people whose approval she had sacrificed her daughters to impress. Unable to keep up the payments on her leased luxury sedan with her garnished wages, the car was quietly repossessed in the middle of the night. A year later, the atmosphere in my life was unrecognizable. My architectural firm had just landed its largest commercial contract to date, and my home was finally the peaceful, quiet sanctuary it was always meant to be. Mia was living in a small, affordable apartment across town, working full-time at a reputable marketing agency, and slowly rebuilding her credit from scratch with the help of the fraud attorney. We had dinner together every Sunday, not at opulent steakhouses to show off for relatives, but in my apartment, cooking simple meals and talking for hours. I had completely severed all contact with Margaret. I didn't know where she lived or how she was managing her debts, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel an ounce of guilt about it. I had spent years building a structural foundation for my career, but it was the systematic dismantling of my mother's toxic empire that finally allowed me to build a truly beautiful, peaceful life for myself. Justice had not only been served, it had set us free.